Um, Welcome everyone. I'm Katie Unger. I use she and her and hers. I am based in Brooklyn and I work as a strategist and a trainer working across movement, all kinds of movement organizations. I come out of about 20 years working first in the labor movement, helping build powerful campaigns against corporations in industrial laundries, in farms, in fast food, and others. And these days, I support organizations on criminal justice, voting rights, economic justice, climate justice in helping develop our movement's muscle for strong strategy. Um, but I have been doing this informally for a very long time. I come from 4 generations of movement family, of activists and organizers. So I don't remember my first protest. I remember the first one I planned in 7th grade. So I don't think I knew what power analysis was, but I soon did. And the reason that this comic strip, which is Far Side, is up on your screen to start is that this was maybe my first actual lesson in power analysis. I had planned a protest, a campaign in college with my student labor organizing crew. And we had actually won something for the first time ever from the administration. And because of the family I come from, I got this as a congratulatory postcard from my dad. This cartoon, which says, with these early humans standing over a dead woolly mammoth with this tiny little arrow sticking out of his belly, or its belly, which I later learned is wildly unrealistic. And the tagline, "We should write that spot down." Um, and that was my shorthand lesson from my father, that it's sometimes worth going back and looking at how and why we win things. Um, and in the years since, I had this up above my desk for many, many, many years, and came to realize a bunch of things. That when I got it, I pretty much assumed that what that spot was the spot on the belly that the arrow had gone into. But over the years, I actually started to really question that the spot actually could just as easily have been where they found the mammoths. Maybe that was a particularly good feeding ground. Or it could have been where they were standing when they had better aim. So, and that it really was my pathway into what does it really mean for us together to do power analysis for our campaigns. So when we start with our campaigns, we always start with a problem, right? That we have no shortage of problems. The problems are infinite, frequently distressing and demoralizing. We are pretty good together collectively at having ideas and even envisioning solutions to our problems. That's sort of like one of the things that we know. We have this huge list of things that we have to fix, and we even have some solutions of like what are the policies and how we might envision and imagine a better world. But the thing that we're going to focus on today is really power over policy, because one of the things that we come across over and over and over again is that unfortunately the power of our ideas and our solutions, and even being right, isn't enough. It's not enough for us to win. So we're going to start with a little incisive strategic analysis from one of my favorite political theorists, and we're going to hope that this works. Eric Cartman.
All our work is done.
So what are you gonna do with all these underpants that you steal?
Collecting underpants is just phase 1. Phase 1, collect underpants.
So what's phase 2?
Hey, what's phase 2? Phase phase 1, we collect underpants. Yeah, but what about phase 2? Well, phase 3 is profit. Get it?
I don't get it.
You see, phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, phase 3, profit.
Oh, I get it. No, you don't, fat.
So, how many of us have been at meetings where we have a really clear phase 1 where we're starting to work, and we have a phase 3, we know what we want to win, but phase 2 turns out to be a shrug, right? We're not often the place where our campaigns fall down is exactly that, is who do we need to win and what do we need to win and how are we going to figure that out? That it's not enough for us to have phase 1 and phase 3. And in fact, I love that little video enough that my actual name of my practice is phase 2 strategies, because I think that the place where we win happens in turning the shrug of phase 2 into an actual plan. So how are we going to figure that out together? One of the things that's really important, we often try to campaign on only an idea or an issue, right? And that can be really hard. There's nothing to grab onto. It's a concept, it's a system, and it's actually part of how our system is designed, right? To make it seem like everything is inevitable and nobody's at fault, right? And those things are the hardest, that poverty is just a thing, that racism is just in the air, and that there's no person who's at fault, and therefore it's really hard to change it. And so it's our job to figure out, what are we going to grab onto? What are we going to do? Where are we going to have our protest? Who can we move? Even very, very simple questions, or ostensibly simple questions, who gets the petition? Because this is the place that we end up, trying to convince some sort of general public or that our idea makes sense without ever figuring out what we might need. So that's where targets come in, right? And the much of this training is going to be about, how do we focus in on a target? And why do we need an actual target? Because targets help us do a whole bunch of things. And some of these may seem obvious and some of these may be less obvious. So targets help us clarify things. Who can actually give us what we want? It's a very important question. They can polarize. This is one that sometimes we kind of neglect, that winning things is not necessarily getting everybody onto our side, right? That there are folks that are causing problems, and we want to create a situation where there are actual sides here. If you're in the labor movement, you may want to know the song, "Which Side Are You On?" Right? That picking sides has value. And one of the ways that capitalism and all of our systems keep going is kind of to pretend that there aren't sides, that things just are the way that they are. So we have moments where we need to pick targets because we need to know which side people are on. We also use targeting to build urgency, right? People need to actually know that it's their responsibility, and to personalize, which is another one that sometimes we have a lot of discomfort with, how personal we can make an issue on somebody. But the people who either are making harm happen or who could actually prevent the harm need to sometimes feel like it is their actual responsibility to make it stop, because otherwise it's incredibly easy for people with power, including in particular the power to stop things, to feel like somebody else could take care of it. Targets help us sharpen our messages, and they can create dilemmas and narrow options. And so what I mean by that, and somebody asked a question earlier in the chat, I think, about kind of how we use this in the democracy space. This is a place where when we're creating targets, excellent campaign targeting narrows the options for our targets, right? So that basically the only way, like what we're trying to do here is to really create like a small chute where the only way for them to get out of it is to do what we want. And we can't create that kind of pressurized situation without actually being focused on who our targets are. Does that all make sense? Ask questions in the chat, please. So to have a shared working definition of targets, right? Targets are the individuals and groups that we see as most able to deliver our victories directly or indirectly, right? The indirect pieces, right? People who can stop the harm are often the indirect ones, or people who can move our top targets. So the first step to figuring out our targets, this is definitely the rocket science portion of this. It's making a list. And we're going to do that together. We're going to right now become a committee, all of us on this call, on this video. And we're going to try to do this together, and we're going to do it live. Something that we've seen happen repeatedly throughout COVID, through this crisis, right, is that in many communities, right, as over this past year, institutions, powerful and often wealthy institutions, have taken this opportunity to lay off people, right, to lay off workers. And so we are about to become the ex-Marxispot committee to protect the food service workers of our college. Somebody here is an organizer at USC, right? So since we're going to do this live together, I'm going to come out of presentation mode, and we're actually going to type. And this is a spot where, yes, this happened. Sadly, Aurelia, I had like 17 different screenshot potential headlines to use for this. It was all over the internet. So we're going to start together, and this is what you would do with your organizing committee, is start by making a list of all of the people, and this is what's important here, for or against or on the fence, who can either impact or be impacted by your issue. So let's use the chat and tell me, who are our stakeholders? Students, and I'm going to put them up here. I'm going to see how fast I can type. We gotta fill this. I want to fill this screen within the next minute or two, because there's a lot of stakeholders here. Faculty, the janitor, staff. Who else? There's a lot of stakeholders here. The family of the workers, administration, community, politicians, legislators, maybe if it's a public call, the actual food contractor, clergy, donors to the college. Who else? Alumni, yes. Who else is in our community? Parents of students. Who else do we have? Local politicians, the workers themselves. Who else? The unions, right? There might be both the actual unions and representing them. The food suppliers might be a stakeholder. Who else might be stakeholder, right? Local media might be a stakeholder. We're gonna go assume we're in like a sort of, we're not in New York City. We're in some smaller place where the college is kind of a big deal. Student orgs. Who else runs this place? Townies, local restaurants. think we got donors in here, the president. All right. So we'll call that enough because we're about to run out of, the board, except we can't call it enough until we have the board of directors on there because that's important for the trustees. Right. So the part that's really important here about making this first list, right, is thinking big, right? Is thinking about these questions of impact or be impacted by this issue. Because, right, one of the things that we're trying to do here is change things from the folks who are doing harm really want to create situations of harm that we see as an us versus them situation, that there's only two like sides. There's like them and there's the workers, and that everybody else is somehow on the sidelines. But a key piece of our strategy and planning is that the sidelines can, should, and must be much, much narrower than that. We want to basically erase the sidelines because everybody else being on the sidelines is a huge piece of what allows injustice to happen. And so it's super important that we've put folks like local restaurants and the town and other folks on there of thinking about impact in a much more comprehensive way than that, right? So now let's go into the question, and we're going to stay in this view, which I hope is still clear enough for people because we're going to keep working together live in a minute. Where we think about what can make a good target, right? What and who makes somebody a good target? So the first one is probably the clearest, right? The actual decision maker. They're always on our target list, whether or not we can actually move them when we start our campaign, right? The most important thing about our power mapping is that we're doing our power mapping with the power we have right now. This is the current situation. So we have to put a lot of other people on the list because we might need some more folks in order to have influence over our decision maker, right? Which is our second set of targets, people who influence them directly. Other folks who might be on our target list are newsmakers who, like, for some reason we can connect to our target, right? Who we can get on the record in some way. Making an example and demonstrating impact is another really important piece of targeting. Now, the example that we're using, there's only one, there's one particular bad guy, but a lot of our other fights, we have a huge list, and we start with a really big list of folks causing somewhat similar harm. And so if folks have heard about the Coalition of Immokalee Workers and their tomato campaign for justice for farm workers, for tomato workers, right? They ran this incredible campaign where they figured out that the farmers had no power, basically, and that the folks who had the power were the folks setting the pricing. But it turned out the folks setting the pricing were McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Walmart, Albertsons, Safeway, like every major tomato buyer in the country. And one of the things about making an example and demonstrating impact is a reminder, we don't have to go after everybody at once. And we don't have to go after the biggest worst, right? People often ask us, and you may get this question in the media when you pick a campaign, and they're like, people ask us the question, well, are they the worst ones? If not, why are you going after that? We don't have to go after the biggest worst first. We can go after someone where we think we can make an impact. We can demonstrate our problem and make an example so that somebody else, right? If we make an example of one of those, McDonald's, for example, the other ones may think, I don't want that to happen to me. And our campaign becomes easier. We might pick, for example, this next one, a soft target win. If we assess that one of our potential harm doers has a reason we think that they might give in to us more easily. They have one board member who might be more sympathetic. Their clients actually care about farm workers, right? Their reputation is more socially justice oriented. So we get to pick, and we're far better off picking than spreading ourselves thin and picking everybody at the same time. Because if the point of targeting is to focusing on everybody defeats our purpose. Does that make sense to folks? It's really important, right? Like that we don't have to go after either everybody causing harm or the biggest worst first, right? Accessibility, winnability, it's incredibly important. And this last one is another kind of unusual one. High profile fence sitters as targets, right? I was talking before about the sidelines and who these other folks are, right? Everybody wants to be on the sidelines who's not directly involved because that's really comfortable, right? If we're going to use a sports metaphor, they're like sitting in their seats and their boxes and ordering hot dogs, right? That's where things are comfortable. And neutrality for almost everybody is going to be their base position, right? Because picking sides is uncomfortable, right? And so we can pick high profile fence sitters who don't think that they're involved and activate them. A story about many years ago, I was involved in a grassroots campaign against a truly evil diamond dealer in New York, who was both a diamond miner and a settlement builder and all kinds of awful things. And he had an opening for his first store in New York, and all kinds of celebrities came. And they had no idea who this guy was, right? Their publicist did it. One of those people actually happened to be Susan Sarandon. And so we decided, and this was sort of before the last few years of Susan Sarandon, but to basically take those celebrities and make them pick a side, confront them with what they had done, and make them take sides. Then we also did that with all of the charities that this guy gave money to, right? Because the charities were really insistent. We have nothing to do with this. This is not our issue. So our job as campaigners was to make it their issue until they had to publicly reject being associated with this person. Because neutrality is the kind of baseline, this like phony neutrality is the baseline state of capitalism. And it is toxic for our campaigns, right? It is the quagmire of like sitting in the status quo, the idea that doing nothing is the norm. So that's why there's value in forcing fence sitters to get off the fence, right? That there are no sidelines. We want people to tell us who, to take a side, sometimes even if that side is against us, right? Really important. So let's dive in now to like, how are we going to figure out of our big list, which one is which, who's what? We're going to use a power map. Now, have folks seen power maps on XY axes before, X being horizontal, Y? Some folks have probably seen this. This version is a little different, even for folks who have seen this, than the one that most people use. So the up and down is the same. So we're going to take all of our people who we put on the list, and we're going to figure out how much power we think they have over the issue. So for example, if, and New Yorkers know this one, if it's something that the governor could do by executive order, he would go all the way up at the top, right? He could do it. He doesn't have to ask anybody else to do it. Other folks may have less power over an issue. Now, left, right is where, for folks who are new to this, I'll explain. And then for folks who are not so new, this may be different than what you've seen. On the left is less ability for us to move them, our current, right? And remember, when you do this in real world, Post-its are your friend. I like doing this virtually because actually you can keep moving it. This is never something you do in marker, because this is what your power is now. Less ability to move them versus more ability to move them. So folks who may have seen this before may have seen versions where left to right is measuring support. Have folks seen that? Like opposed to us and supporting us is kind of the more usual one. And I specifically don't use that because we don't always actually need people to agree with us to win. And especially for folks familiar with labor fights, the day that you sign the best contract of your life with your members, the boss doesn't necessarily agree with you any more than he did the day you started. In fact, he probably hates you a whole lot more. The thing that has shifted is not the boss's support for your issue, it's his understanding of power. And the same is true for electeds a lot of the time. Again, going back to our esteemed governor in New York, when we win things from that governor, we haven't necessarily won support, we've won power. And on the flip side, there's a bunch of folks, as we discover, and as you're working on legislative initiatives especially, you might have a whole bunch of people in your state legislature who are like, yeah, I think that's great. And then when it comes down to it, so you would put them like all the way over here if you were just measuring their support. But when it comes down to fighting for your bill, it turns out they were really good at saying it and not that good at doing it, right? In New York, we actually had a ton of people who said that they supported fair pay for home care workers in this last budget. And then when it came down to it, in fact, a majority of them said that. We didn't win it because support turned out to be not the right measure. And convincing people that we're right turns out to not always be the measure of how we're going to win. So instead, we're going to actually be pretty rigorous about actually how much power we have over people, right? And how much influence. It's a really fundamental difference, I think. So let's try to do some of this together. I am going to, I put some of the ones because I was hopeful that we would come up with some of these on little Post-it notes, and this is how one might do this in the real world. And the way I like to do this is, and you can argue over colors forever, is put like our team, our coalition, in green, and the people we know who are active opposition in red, right? This is a way of actually putting a support measure in here, and everybody else in yellow. And you can argue over that forever. So we're gonna, where do we want to put the university president on this? And folks can put in the chat, like, if you think like, we know he's got a lot of up here. How much, when we're starting our campaign, how much ability do we think we have to move him? Less, right? So he's probably starting out somewhere over there. Do we think he can make this decision entirely on his own? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's somebody else. Probably not. So we're not going to put him like all the way at the top, like he can't snap his hand and fix it. So we're going to just like start him here. Now, when you're doing this with your group, the colors mean red are people we know are sort of currently actively opposed to us. And yellow is somewhere in the middle. They haven't necessarily taken sides, and green is who we are now. So someone just talked about like the board of directors or the trustees, right? They may have actual power. This may actually be sort of inaccurate. I'm not sure the trustees even know this is, who knows if they know this is happening yet. We're going to recolor them, makes it easier. The trustees, we think actually, right, could like override this decision. So they actually maybe have the top power, right? We might actually have some access to some of the trustees, right? It's a larger group. Some of them might have been elected by alumni. So like, we're gonna just, it's hard to do with 45 people. We would usually do this with everybody off mute. We're gonna start over here. Let's put the workers here. We're gonna also, this is the adventure of doing this stuff live. The workers, where do we think the workers start? Less power, high support. Yep. But the union, how about the union? Is that like hopefully high support and maybe some more power, right? Somewhere over, let's throw them down over here. So one of the things, and actually we didn't put ourselves on here because we're the support committee, right? And one of the notes that I'll make here is that we're the O 2.0 committee to stop this, right? How about us? Where are we putting ourselves? We better have ability to move ourselves. We're in trouble. We're like down here somewhere, maybe, hopefully somewhere over here. So one note as we do this quickly, this is a spot to take some real time. I worked with a group once where we spent an hour and a half putting the group on the map because half the room thought we were here to start and half the room thought we were here. Why do you have to stop and make that a real conversation? Because if you have such radically different understandings of your own power, you're going to make some really different plans. And that's a big enough difference. This wasn't like we're a 4 or a 5 on a scale of 10. This was like half the room thought we were like 3 and half thought we were 8. Better actually sit down and talk about your realities, because you cannot make good plans if you don't understand your own selves, right? I'm a little bit, I tend to lean toward, to mention Gramsci, optimism of the will and pessimism of the intellect. So if we're having the argument between 4 and 8, I'm usually going to guess that we're probably closer to the 4 than the 8. And it's going to actually be safer for us to, like, I would rather plan as if we have less power and find out that we have more than act like we have all the power in the world and end up with our people exposed and damaged. So my tendency is going to be to start kind of down here. So let's put a couple more folks on the board. Where do we think the students are? Students, we're going to put them somewhere, right? Put some students in here. Let's talk about like local businesses, right? We've got 100 people who are going to be laid off. Where do we think local businesses are? Somewhere, they may be not like as inclined to support us automatically, but they're like kind of over here. Yep, here we've got somebody talking about alumni, right? People who are paying the bills, parents, alumni, donors, right? Parents maybe have some more power. Where do we think they are? They probably head up over here. Let's go with, and again, when you do this yourselves, you do this much more Alumni's got quite a bit of power, right? They might be harder to. I've got a question here about rectifying different power levels in each part of the state. So you may have to do some breaking down depending on what your issue is, right? If you're doing a legislative campaign, and you might be breaking things down, right? You might actually break down the whole trustees or the whole legislature and say, for example, the chair of the board of trustees gets his own one, whereas the two trustees that we know come out of like a more justice oriented framework get their own tag, right? And we figure out where they are. So you might start out with these broad concepts and then start to realize that there's actually differentiation within them. You should be careful. You don't want your map to have everybody. Learning the balancing act takes a little practice. But you might need to break down when you identify, and part of what this may help you do is identify constituencies that might actually matter and who may behave differently, right? And so that's what you're trying to identify. And so that's kind of how you would approach this within a statewide org. The other thing that might happen as you're doing this is you may have some research questions, right? And as I would be doing this, I would have in person, I would have a big list like, oh, what do we need to know? What do we need to look up? We better find out. Where do these people work? What happens here? What's, we might want to know things like, right, something about the mayor, right? Like something about the tax base of our local community and the way that our university doesn't, most universities don't pay taxes, right? We might start, right? But they may have some real control here and we might actually have some influence over them or some influence, right? So we could do this for a long time, right? This is a great question. Do we do power mapping based on assumptions and then research to fill gaps or vice versa? We need to do at least some work before we power map, right? We need to do some work to understand our issue. We need to have understood something about about some decision making. We should probably do a little bit of research of like, which committee might get this bill, right? Who are some of these things? So you want to do, it's a little bit of a circle, right? You want to do some research. You want to understand enough about your issues to at least be able to make some reasonable assessments here. And also you're basing this on your actual organization, right? That for example, that you have a whole circle of, right? Like if we weren't just this, our brand new committee, we would actually know that we have from many years, we have a set of clergy relationships, right? Who we activate easily, right? You're using the entire basis of your grassroots organization, your union, your campaign, right? You're bringing all of your history to the table and then trying to understand for this new issue or this particular moment, who's going to give you your win? What do things look like? Right? And exactly. Research informs power map, which informs the research. What was the middle part of this chart? Like the yellows. Oh, this is, our influence, the left, right, how far they are horizontal is our ability to move them. So the contractors here actually might be a little weird, right? If they're laying off, like that might be a bad sign for them. They're probably oppositional. I don't know where we're going to put them. But they maybe don't have that much power here, right? And if we were doing this for hours, which this does take sometimes, we would go back and put all of these on our list. But we don't have that kind of time right now. Let's look at this and see, are there anyone we really need to get on the board who we haven't put on the board? I think we're doing okay on that. So what we'll point out here is that this is a pretty typical power map at the beginning of our campaign, right? The honest truth is usually we start our campaigns with most of our people clustered in the quadrant with less power over an issue, and most of the other people, most of the opposition with a lot more power, because that's how the system is set up. And if that wasn't true, we probably would have won yet already, right? Like this is maybe daunting, but is pretty accurate, right? That's how the system is set up against us, and having a pretty clear assessment of just how exactly it's set up against us is how we start to figure this out. One of the things it also may tell us, though, in terms of targets, right, is like if we start out here and the decision maker is all the way over here, that's like a Hail Mary throw, right? That's a tough plan for us, right? So what this might show us is that our first target might not be the university president, right? Because this is a setup that is not a strong thing for us, and that we would need our green cluster to grow bigger, to grow stronger, to move, to have some more people in it, in order to have a chance of moving the university president. So this might start to say, like, who might we want to focus on first? If you were looking at this, like, what do we think we might want to try to do to targets? Like, who would be interesting to think about? Yeah, we might want to think about the mayor. We might want to break down the board of trustees, right? To see, are there a couple of trustees who actually are more like here? Oh yeah, we didn't put, that was an important one. Donors, money matters, right? Trustees and donors have like a lot here. So we might want some more information about some of these folks to figure out which of them, because they can reach, right? Their arms are long enough to reach the university president. Right? We want to see if we can do some student activation. Right, let's see if I can do this. Right? You're like, can we get some students at the parents? Can we get some, right? We start to look, this starts to look like something like, oh, maybe these people can move these people, right? In order to move our power, right? Here we go. Like, and then we're going to do some research into these, because maybe, right, famous alumni, because when we're done with that research, hopefully we're going to find, right, this is like famous, here's our famous alumni who's actually, who we're going to turn green, who we're going to put on the map, right? Who actually has some access to shame. Oops, that was not right. The university president, right? This starts to look like some sort of, you know, wall of string situation, but you can start to see very quickly how our strategy needs to like understand how to fill in the rest of the map. And again, this yellow piece, those are all people waiting to be activated by us. And so once we've started to think about, for example, the mayor, and I'm going to go back into this version, we want to shift our frame a little bit. And this is a piece we could spend an entire another session on. Once you've decided that the first person you want to move is someone, you want to put them in the middle, right? And you really want to shift your frame. not to think about what you want to say to them, but to think about who influences them, what impacts them, and what they need to hear to move, right? This isn't about you anymore. This is like you're going to do a little bit of like imaginary like cosplay of like, if I'm Jeff Bezos, if I'm the mayor, what keeps me up at night? What do I care about? Right? Which is very different from how we often think about persuading people to support us. The thing that matters about persuading the powerful people to use their power is to understand what they care about. And often when you have this conversation, how many people have had this conversation and one of the first thing that comes up is reputation? That's something that comes up. Yep. I want us to be incredibly rigorous about that, because when it comes, I want us to have some real evidence. If we want to say that they care about their reputation, reputation can be one of those fuzzy cloud things, like in my initial slide. It's like this foggy thing. Who do they actually care about? Whose opinions matter to them? Because often the answer is that like reputation starts out high on the list, but money matters more. And they will make a lot of compromises to their reputation based on money. And that there's actually only a very small subset of people whose reputation, for whom their reputation actually matters, right? So the university president cares about his reputation to his largest donors, not to the general world, right? Exactly. Reputation, right? We use this word reputation, but reputation is code. The university president cares about his reputation to major donors. He cares about his reputation if it impacts his ability to recruit students. Does he actually care about his reputation as like a generally good human in the world? We should be really rigorous before we put that as a top thing on our power map. He may care about his reputation as a philanthropist somewhat. They may care about their reputation if they're a deacon in a local church, right? That's a reputation. So we need to be really focused on centering the reality of their connections and not some generalized idea of reputation. This is important both for the people with power and for the fence sitters, because except for the people, like it's why some of the celebrity fence sitters are fun, because for them reputation is actually a thing, right? Like that's the main thing they're selling is their reputation. But for most people, that is not true. And so we want to be really clear where it is true, right? And that may mean we have to break down our map a little further. Like, you know, is it the local media that matters or is it the business press that matters? If we have a corporate, right? If a big chain is closing the local grocery store, do they care about the local press or do they care about the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal? Which one of those creates a reputational shift that actually matters, right? Someone saying distracted by the exciting target. Also, we get really heated about hypocrisy. Showing somebody to be a hypocrite is also one of those same things about reputation, right? What is our evidence that they actually care about being seen as inconsistent if their inconsistence is profitable for them, right? So the key pieces, right? This is why things like support and reputation and things are really, really scrutinized in the way that I'm talking about this, is because we need to be real clear about what is actually driving the system. So a couple more things in our last few minutes. I'm going to skip mostly over this one. We talked about this earlier, right? That a key piece of doing this is understanding ourselves, right? What do we have? Our assets, our skills, our membership, what do we need to do to go stronger, right? Like folks know there's a chant, right? Who's got the power? We got the power. When we looked at our chart, like we can do the chant to pump our people up, but when we're actually making our plan, let's be real about how much power we have right now and what we're going to do to build it. So this is the key thing that I want to make sure everybody leaves with on this one. This is not Star Wars, right? Who wants to think of themselves as the Rebel Alliance, right? We all like to picture ourselves as like the scrappy band. Now, what's the problem here? The problem here is at the end of the movie, they say like, okay, we have one shot. We're gonna hit the weak spot on the Death Star and we're gonna throw everything there. And there's that like one person in the corner who's like, this will never work. And everybody ignores him or her. In the actual universe, in the movie, it's probably a him, and in the real world, it's probably a her, just to be real. And everybody ignores them. And they go and they do that thing. And it works because it's a movie. But if we're planning like that, we're doing a massive disservice to our people. Because not only is there not a magic bullet, but the things arrayed between us and them, because even in the movie, when they win, there were 1,000 unnamed little ship fighters who are gone, right? That is a way of scorching your earth of, right, this is real. There are people at stake. Our people's lives are on the line. Our movement's ability to continue to organize is at stake. And that means we don't do anybody any favors when we take that one shot. And if it doesn't work, we are literally nowhere, right? We don't actually have that option. The credits don't roll. So we want to be really rigorous and careful about how we think about that, right? Even though this is the sexy part. Somebody was asking about like, what's the sexy thing? This is like the sexy thing. The round ball that I would rather leave you with the image of to think about this is actually a pool table, right? We're not doing a single shot at the Death Star. We are learning a whole table. We are seeing the boundaries. We are assessing. Somebody said last year in the comments, and we remember that most of the game is decided before the break, right? We are calculating angles. We are setting up shots. We are keeping our eye on the 8 ball, but not aiming at it first. Who plays pool? What happens if you aim at the 8 ball first? And you sink the 8 ball at the beginning of the game? You don't win. Game over, right? Game over, done. And the important thing about pool that helps for us is that there's a lot of ways to win. You can win by shooting your shots. You can win by blocking other people's. You can win by making it impossible for someone else to win, right? You can win, and important, every time you take a shot, maybe you get a little better. You actually learn, your power grows. And maybe the next shot, you actually can figure out how to do that thing that I've never been able to do because I have actually terrible aim in the real world. To like plan where the cue ball is going to land after that next shot, right? So like, you may be like, oh, but the sexy thing is to be the Rebel Alliance. But like, I'm going to argue that like, let's go for that version of like, I want to be the pool shark. I want us to be the pool sharks. I want us to watch the table, incorporate what we learn, and make our plans so that we are getting better, stronger, savvier, more resilient, more comprehensive, right? And that no one shot risks our entire community, because this is real. And our community needs us to plan our campaigns in ways that keep building our capacity to fight for the next day and to fight for the next day and to fight for the next day and to set us up for incremental building that makes use of our power, that teaches us new skills, and that plays that, right? Like I was so inspired by the Georgia folks because this is, right? That's exactly what they were doing, right? It's a long game. So these are the first, and again, not the last, steps towards strategy, right? We want to do this stuff before we pick our tactics, right? Tactics, that's phase one, right? Collecting underpants. Skipping straight to the collecting the underpants without the strategy is how we end up with like me, right? We want to start with our strategies. And we were at our very last moment. And I know it didn't really leave us time for lots of questions, but I hope I took them in the chat. So I'm going to leave you with back to our write that spot down and my information. And if there are questions in the very last moments to throw in the chat, I will hang for a minute and will be here for folks. But thank you for all your participation, for mapping with me, and for all of your questions in the chat. So if you have questions, happy to stay for a few minutes. Yes, the PowerPoint will be shared around. I do this for organizations, yes. This is you got my email there. This is what I do for a living, is help folks both to do this presentation and to help facilitate if people are actually doing this process for real over a day. Somebody's asking about how to avoid over polarizing. So, you know, polarizing, you want to be pretty strategic about who you're polarizing, right? If you're looking to build your own base, right? That might be not your moment. You're not trying to polarize that group of people. You want to be really specific about who you want to polarize, right? Who are you offering that binary choice to, the like in or out? You want to focus those moments on people with power, right? And sometimes really like shifting them off, like if they make the wrong choice, like that's okay. We're really scared of people falling on the wrong side of the fence in power. But need to remember that the people who have versions of power are actually already on the wrong side of the fence. They're just not admitting it. And so part of these polarizing opportunities is really that remember we said about capitalism is pretend neutral, right? Is that we're demanding that they actually stop pretending that they're on the wrong side of the fence, because once they're on the wrong side of the fence, we can actually deal with them based on the standing that they are already in. So when we're talking about the people with power, we're worried about getting like a negative result, but honestly, getting a positive result sometimes hurts worse, right? How many corporations made like phony, bogus Black Lives Matter statements, right? Pretending that they were taking a stand, but they didn't change anything, right? Greenwashing, all these things, right? Like if we're making an ask that's high enough that they actually either have to live up to that or stop pretending that they care, we might actually be in a better place once that happens, even when somebody says no, because they were already saying no. They were saying no when they like, you know, underpaid their Black workforce, like, and they say no every day. We're just in other situations letting them pretend that they're on a fence that they're not on.